The past couple of years have certainly given us brand new, fresh faces to talk about. And some of them are not necessarily all of that new. Sure, they may still only be 2 to 3 albums into their career, which could still consider them as a relatively new project, but it's not as though these albums that we spoke about in, say, 2016 or 2017 were necessarily debut discs. Instead, they were just the most recent offering from a group that had a little bit of reputation, but after that album, got a large reputation, to the point where now their brand new album is seen as just as important of an event as, say, a new disc from Dream Theater, which is later this month. Soen is certainly a group that has that reputation, and it's because of the excellence of Lykaia, which came out a few years ago, and really took, I think, a lot of listeners by surprise just how much they ended up loving this disc. Of course, the fans of this band said, they've been doing this ever since they got started, but at the same time, that's not everybody. Not everybody is going to gravitate to things right whenever it gets started. So Lykaia was able to build a monstrous reputation to the point where now with Lotus coming out in 2019, the band has a lot to really own up to. They need to have a strong follow-up to this disc that definitely seems to have pushed their career to a brand new height, which is something that in a band you're always aiming to do. You're always aiming to go further as opposed to regress. So Lotus has this mountainous challenge of trying to compare with Lykaia, which is seemingly unfair, but at the same time it has a lot of great things going for it going in, so as a result, more ears were going to be on this disc. The pressure was certainly on. So whenever we originally begin this disc with Opponent, it's the first track. It's starting! Opponent is a great song to really start this thing off, and immediately, if you're a brand new listener to Soen, if this is your first experience, the first thing that may come to your mind is, I kind of wish this is what Opeth did with the Heritage, Pale Communion, and Sorceress cycle. I wish this is what Opeth meant whenever they said that they were going to turn into more of a progressive band. Considering there's a lot of similarities that are bore, but whenever you listen to the new Opeth material, it has that prog rock timbre to it, whereas Soen still maintains itself within the progressive metal veneer. This is one where it stays within that realm of prog talk, but it still has a little bit more of a heaviness to it, which I think that folks feel is sorely missing from new Opeth. I think that what Opeth is doing right now is just fine, and what Soen is doing right here is absolutely excellent. It's building itself its own personal identity, despite the fact that there is a comparison that can be made there. And as a result, Soen is very much paralleled by bands such as Leprous, whenever it comes to sort of this darker edge of prog, whenever it comes to the overall tone and sound. Going into Lascivious, we have our first real major track off of this album. This 5.5-minute long track just feels like it has a real openness to it, even though it is sort of in your face and doesn't stand still. As a result of that kinesis, you feel very connected to it, and as a result of feeling connected to it, it's one that you're immediately thinking, I could play this once again and sort of just say forget the rest of this album for a while. It's the first of many songs that has that overall value to it, where it feels like the songwriting was just on a real up day. Going into Martyrs and Lotus, we get a couple more tracks that have that same feeling to it, especially this self-titled cut. Here we start to see how Soen plays with pacing a little bit and how they're able to use emotion and inject that into their material in order to craft a real feeling, one that is very much almost an orgasmic or a very tense feeling, where you feel that you have, this is all that you have. This is your world, and as it swirls and surrounds you, you feel very connected to it, especially with Lotus. The title track does this very, very well, considering it controls the pace, it dictates the tone, and is able to just take you on a journey that you absolutely wish to go on. I like this track. I think that Lotus is a great first half representation of what the album that bears its name is really all about. And then going into Covenant, which is another strong cut, into Penance, which is absurdly good, we start to realize that very similar to what we just talked about with Astronoid, whereas the first half was strong but felt a little bit weak, if that makes any sort of sense. It was there, but it wasn't. The second half just immediately ramps up instantaneously. At first, whenever I listened to Opponent and Lascivious, despite their strengths, I thought, you know what, this is probably not going to match up quite so well against Lykaia. But then by the time we get into Lotus and Penance, That is where I start to think to myself, maybe it does. Maybe this is an album that has every bit of the emotion, every bit of the riffing, every bit of the great song structure that the previous album was able to deliver to us. Maybe it's definitely one and the same, and that comparison, silly as it may be considering we should look at it individually, perhaps we can say that these are a duo of albums from Soen that feel like it has a very strong overall representation. But then you get to River and realize that this disc might be in a class all its own. This is an absolutely spellbinding track. This is one that's only 5.5 minutes in length and feels like it just stays with you almost like a permanent mood swing. And as a result of that, it just lifts and layers on you to the point where you get that emotion driven deep inside your body, to the point where the waterworks perhaps may want to come for the more sensitive listeners, whereas the rest of us can easily feel that strength that we have inside, that typical sort of, strong attitude that keeps us from getting overly emotional, slowly start to crumble, corrode, and break. It's a song that whenever you start it off sounds extremely innocent, and in fact doesn't sound like it's going to really translate into anything very special. But whenever it hits its bridge and goes into its more hooky moments, this is where it really expands itself and shows its true girth and its true power. It's a magnificent thing, and one that I certainly recommend to anybody who is out there, not just fans of this style of music, whether you want to call it progressive metal or not. Rival is another tremendous addition that follows up River, and once again, looking at the second half of this disc, it's so far been spotless. It's been a wonderful experience. Lunacy is a bit of an odd duck, however, as a finisher on this album, considering it's 8 minutes and 5 seconds, but dies off after a 4. And I think that the idea of this is to try to, really reflect the whole idea of insanity, or to reflect the whole idea of nonsense. Either that, or it's just a compositional idea. You have a bit of soft music in the background. It's a very empty composition for the latter half, really, of this album, and then slowly sort of builds a bit for its ending, for its final moments, but it's a fleeting thing, and if this was a risk that the band decided to take, I don't think it quite hit exactly the notes that they wanted to, but to be fair, the first half of this song is very well constructed, so it still has memory, and honestly, the whole song just has memory as it stands, considering it is such an odd sort of experience. I typically like it whenever bands are able to save one of their weirder or more one-of-a-kind tracks for the final cut on an album, because it makes it instantly rememberable, and this is certainly one that does accomplish that fact, even though the song itself may feel like it killed a lot of the momentum that was just rebuilt from tracks 4 through 8. So what do we have here? What do we have? Do we have ourselves a massive album that could compare perhaps to Swallow the Sun, which we just got last week, which as of right now would be the album of the year? And the answer to that is absolutely we do. We have one that's extremely close. In fact, we have an album that has the exact same score of 26 out of 30. I love what this disc does in the way it's composed and just how it's reflected. The flow of this album doesn't give you the opportunity to really feel, distant from it or alarmingly close. It has that nice balance. You stay right there, cradled within its arms, unwilling to move. And as a result of that, it becomes a very calm and comforting feeling, despite the fact that you are becoming emotionally vulnerable as one track leads to the next. All of these things lead to an album that has a very unique connection to its listeners, and that's why it is such a strong release from a group that right now is doing some really awesome things. Lykaia and Lotus, both great duo of albums. Cannot recommend them enough. If this is your first time ever hearing of the band Soen, you need to go out and investigate them immediately. And that is my recommendation for you today. What did you guys think about this album? What did you think about Lotus by Soen? Let me know in the comments below. My name is Coverkillernation, and I'm part of CKN Club. In fact, I'm the leader of it. This shirt, by the way, is available. Description box. Scope it out. Check it out. Buy it out. Wear it out. Wow. I'll talk to you guys next time. I'm Coverkillernation. Take care.